Welcome to Gwinnett County Public Library. Thank you for joining our program. Your child learns differently. Now what? With our presenter, Betsy Hill. Betsy Hill is an award-winning educator. She holds a Master of Arts in Teaching and an MBA from Northwestern University. She studied the neuroscience of learning and is former chair of the Board of Trustees at Chicago State University. She teaches strategic thinking at Lake Forest Graduate School of Management. Please welcome Betsy Hill.
Thank you, Amy. It's so great to be here, and I'm delighted to have an opportunity to share some thoughts with you. And what we'll do, I do have some slides, so you've got something to look at besides me, and we'll go through that. I'll stop for questions. I hope that everybody has lots and lots of questions. We love getting those, and really just delighted to be here. So why don't we get started? So I'd like to start by asking each of you just to think for a moment about your child or your children and think about something that is just amazing and wonderful about them that they just do that's so special that makes you just smile and to be happy whenever they do that or whenever you think about that. And then think about something that they really struggle with, that's really hard for them, that, maybe they become discouraged or maybe they become frustrated. Great. So think about one thing that's amazing and wonderful. Think about something your child really struggles with. And with those things in mind, I'm going to go ahead and answer the question that I had on the beginning slide, which is, how do students become more capable and confident learners? So I'm going to give you the answer, or my answer, right at the beginning, and then we'll go back and we'll talk about a bunch of aspects of this. So really, we do that by helping our children or our students understand their strengths and how to use them. And here we're talking about learning strengths. We're talking about the ways that their brains best take in information. And we're going to delve into that some more. And then we have to look at the other side of the coin a little bit. And what we need to do is to help them build their weaker skills so that they're just there for them to use. So those things that are sometimes struggles or sometimes challenges, we actually can help them build those skills so that they are simply something that they do. So this is a chart that we use to talk about what we refer to when we talk about cognitive skills. So cognitive skills are the how of learning. And we talk about this a lot in the book. Cognitive may be a term you've heard. It may be, but you may not be as clear as what we're talking about when we do this. And it's not a sort of household term. It's not something that necessarily I grew up with. In fact, when I was teaching, I started teaching many years ago, this was not something that was generally understood, and it certainly isn't covered in most teacher education programs. So what we're sharing tonight is something that you, if you're parents, which I imagine many of you are, or even if you're teachers, this may be somewhat new to you. So up at the top of this chart, where you see academic performance, workplace, health outcomes, that's why we all do what we do. And all of us who are teachers and educators and parents, we have as our mission, I certainly did as I raised my boys, how helping them get as far as they could academically, helping them prepare to get a job that would be satisfying to them and support them and their families, helping them be healthy and contributing members of society. So that's the ultimate goal as we raise our kids and as we educate them. And the next tier down, is what schools tend to focus on. So reading, writing, math, science, all the rest of the curriculum. More today, attention to social and emotional issues, relationships, decision making, and self management, and those kinds of things, and the emotional aspects of things, particularly following the pandemic. Um, but we don't often spend a lot of time thinking about or even addressing the bottom three tiers. And what we call this is the infrastructure for learning. It's the foundation. It's the cognitive skills that is really how we learn. So we start down at the very bottom with what we call foundational cognitive skills. And these are things like attention, visual processing, auditory processing. These are the ways that information gets into our brains from the outside world, which starts the learning process. So these are skills that happen mostly at a non-conscious level and in fractions of a second. They just are there. I can't explain to you how to take information more efficiently through your visual system or your auditory system, or how to process things more quickly. But these are going to have a big impact on the ability of information to get in to start the learning process. If they're happening efficiently and accurately, that's great. We get a good start. But if not, we're going to see gaps. And because that information just may not be even getting in the first place. And the second tier up is a special group of cognitive skills that are called executive functions. You have heard this term. It's something that is getting a lot more attention in general in education these days. And for good reason, because these executive functions are strongly associated with everything above it on the chart. They're actually good predictors of how far you'll get academically and what your academic performance will look like, how good a job you'll have and how much money you'll make, and whether or not you will be healthy and have good relationships when you become an adult. And there are three core executive functions. One is called working memory. And working memory is very important. It's how we hold information in our mind while we think about it. It's our conscious processing. So whatever's going on in your mind right now, if you're listening to me or looking at this graph, or maybe a child has come in to interrupt you or whatever's going on in your mind, that's what's happening in working memory. The second executive function is inhibitory control, which is how we stop ourselves from doing something we otherwise would do, which is what most people think of when they think of executive functions, but it's a lot more than that. But inhibitory control, you're probably very familiar with. The opposite of it, of course, is impulsivity. So many of us are, we think about ADHD, we think about impulsivity in kids. That's what we're talking about, a skill that hasn't developed as well yet. Cognitive flexibility is our ability to shift our mind and look at something from a different perspective when we need to. So if we try to solve a problem and our first approach doesn't work, we need to shift gears, we need to take a step back, we need to reframe it. That's really what cognitive flexibility is all about. And then there are some higher order executive functions, things like reasoning, problem solving, planning, thinking, creativity. These read, for those of you who may have seen lists like this before, like 21st century skills, or certainly the kinds of skills that are highly valued in workplaces today, maybe even more than technical skills. They're actually more predictive of success in the workplace. So all of this bottom part is the foundation for learning. And if you think about how we use a foundation, think about, for example, if we build a house, we need to build it on top of a good foundation. Otherwise, it won't stand, it will crumble and fall down. And the same is true for learning, that all of these underlying skills need to be strong and in place for all the learning that we want to happen to prepare our children for the future to do so. So another thing that is not as well recognized is the extent to which these skills are actually predictive of academic outcomes. And what the research says is that cognitive skills actually account for 50%, half of the variance in academic outcomes, more than any other factor. And in fact, academic factors, things like teachers and curriculum and technology and class size and all those things that we tend to focus on in schools actually account for about a quarter to a third, and social and emotional factors also 20 to 25%. But the largest factor is our cognitive skills, the capacities that we have developed to actually learn. Schools spend very little effort and attention and resources typically on cognitive and skills, more today on social emotional learning, as I mentioned before, but really only a very little bit on the cognitive capacities that our students bring to the classroom. And those tend to be at the ends of the spectrum. So kids who really struggle. So, for example, children who have individualized education plans, IEPs, or children who maybe are gifted at that end. And then there's an assessment of cognitive skills. But for most of the students in our schools and in our families, probably we don't have much of a clue about what their cognitive capacities are. So I just want to connect this a little bit more directly for you to what this means and how these skills play a role, even in things that we think of as being the basics. So if I ask most teachers what the basics of reading are, I will hear something like decoding, which is emphasis on phonemic awareness and phonics. So the sounds that make up words and what they mean and how we put them together and how we teach them to read and to decode, to sound out words based on that understanding. Fluency, which is your ability to build up fluency as you practice reading, vocabulary, and ultimately, of course, comprehension, which is the goal of reading. And these are important reading skills. We cannot be good readers without them. But what we know is that these are not necessarily the most basic. So there is no decoding part of our brain. And we have to actually build some connections in our brain to be able to read. And we also need to have a bunch of other skills, these basic cognitive skills that we've been talking about, in place. So, for example, things like sustained attention or visual discrimination or sequential processing. So, for example, sequential processing refers to the ability to keep things in a particular order as they come into our brains. And if you think about the word tab, T-A-B, and the word bat, B-A-T, same letters, but a different order. And in English, the sounds sure make a difference, and the sequence of the sounds make a difference. And so for the sequence of the letters do. So we need to keep those in the right order as they come into our brains. So there's a simple example: processing speed for fluency, vocabulary, our reasoning skills, verbal reasoning, and our memory skills. And comprehension, of course, is where the rubber really meets the road. And I talk to a lot of parents these days, and I often hear that, well, my child can read, but they don't understand what they're reading. And so we've started to draw this interesting distinction between being able to read, that is to decode, sound out words, read out loud, and then actually understanding what we're reading. And of course, that's the purpose of reading ultimately. And when we get to comprehension, a couple of skills, particularly visualization and working memory. So I want to come back to one of those executive functions, working memory. If you think about what's happening when we're reading, we're taking in pieces of information as we go through the text. We're holding in our minds while we think about them. That's how we give them meaning. And then that is happening in working memory. It's our only conscious processing. So that comprehension process actually is almost the same as working memory. It's having that information that we can connect it to, being able to visualize or to see or to imagine what it is we're reading about and really give it meaning. The same principles apply in math, from things like basic counting. So if you think about if you were sitting in your child's classroom at school, and we're going to count how many children were wearing blue shirts. So what you're doing when you're doing that is you're keeping track of the things that you've counted and the things that you haven't yet counted and where you are in the sequence. That also happens in working memory. So something that we think of as so basic actually requires some of these same cognitive processes. Certainly problem solving, keeping track of where we are in a multi-step problem. And then when we get into more advanced math, algebra, geometry, calculus, we start to use a lot of spatial perception, visualization, and abstract reasoning, which is why you can often have children who do really well in early math and struggle when they get to math later, or who struggle with some of what we think of the basics, but do brilliantly when they get to more advanced math in high school and college. So the point is, one of the important things to remember here is that all of these skills, you notice that some of these skills are the same ones we had on the list for reading. We have one brain. We take it to every class and for everything we do. And so all of these skills contribute to whatever we're doing, whether it's conversations in real life, whether it's a sports field, whether it's academic. So one of the things that's also important to understand about these skills is that everybody has cognitive strengths and weaknesses. And actually, what I want to do now is I'm going to stop for just a moment and see if there are any questions. So we've talked about some basics of cognitive skills. We've talked a little bit about the role that they play in reading and math and why they're so important. And hopefully underscored the point that if these skills are not working well, we're going to encounter some difficulties in what we otherwise consider the basics of reading and math. All right, so we all have cognitive strengths and weaknesses. I do, you do, our kids do, our teachers do, everybody does. And so I wanted to focus on one particular area tonight, and that's to just talk about something that may seem sort of obvious, which is memory and our ability to memorize information and to remember it over time. And of course, we do a lot of this in school. We have to learn a lot of information and we have to learn a lot of different skills. And we hope very much that our children will be able to remember that when they get to the test, but also when they need to be able to use that information in real life. And wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that there are different kinds of memory. But when it comes to learning and cognitive strengths and weaknesses, very often we see, in fact, mostly we see that we have maybe stronger verbal memory or stronger visual memory. We may have a better memory for information that we read or we hear, or we may have a better memory for visual information, images, charts, graphs, diagrams, all of that kind of thing. And so, depending on what these are, this may spill over, may have an impact on how we do in various aspects of school. The link down at the bottom, which is mybrainware.com, cognitive skills / cognitive skills definitions, is a page that, and I was going to put this in the chat, but you've got it and it's being recorded. So it's a great resource because what it does is it lists 43 cognitive skills that are really important for learning and defines them. So it's something where you can go and refer to it. A lot of parents find it really helpful to go through it because it really starts to highlight some areas where your child may be strong and some areas where they may not be as strong, and to help you start to identify some candidates for the any learning struggles they might be having. So I want you to think a little bit about verbal memory and visual memory. And you may have a intuition for your children. You probably know yourself whether you need to draw a picture of something better to remember it, or whether you can remember it just by being told it and putting it into words. So think about your child and think about how strong maybe their verbal memory is, how strong their visual memory is. So I'll give you just a moment to sort of think about that, and maybe you can, think of one's a plus and one's a plus plus, or one's a, oh boy, they struggle with that. So if you think about how you looked at that, and maybe for yourself or maybe for your children, maybe for your students if you're an educator, and think about whether you thought that your child had better verbal memory than visual memory, or maybe you thought that they had visual memory that was stronger than verbal memory. Both strong, both weak, both average. So this can have all kinds of implications, how you rated your child and how strong their skills are. There are actually ways to assess this. And when we work with families and with schools, we do a cognitive assessment, which will actually compare children to national norms, to their peer group, to see how strong these skills are. And so I want you to think about the fact that many children have stronger verbal memory than visual, or visual memory stronger than verbal. And I want you to think about a typical vocabulary assignment. So a lot of times we have to learn new vocabulary in school, and a typical assignment, I know I've had this kind of assignment, and usually when I give this example, everybody says, oh yes, I got asked to do that. So we got a bunch of new vocabulary words, and the teacher says, I want you to write the word, I want you to write the definition of the word, and I want you to write a sentence using the word. Okay, so you can type in the chat window and even just say, oh yeah, I've had that kind of assignment. And so I want to then ask you a question, or actually, I didn't say it in the form of a question, but this is not necessarily the best way for all students to learn new vocabulary. So if we have a student who has really strong verbal memory, they remember language-based information, they remember what they see and what they read and what they write, anything that's in language, that's a good way for them to learn new vocabulary. But now think about all those other children, and there are a lot of them, who have great memory for visual information, but for whom verbal information doesn't stick. It's not sticking. You tell them something one day, the next day, maybe they didn't, seems like they never heard it. And think about this child who's trying to do this assignment, and they're writing a word and they're writing the definition of the word. But at the end of the day, it's not sticking. They're not remembering it. So this is not a helpful assignment for them to learn that vocabulary. And you can probably imagine it's not real hard to think of a way that would be much better. And that, of course, would be to pair an image or a visual of some kind, a picture, with the vocabulary word. Best way to do this is for them actually to draw the picture, think about what it means to them, because then what you're doing is you're giving them the way that they think about it, the way they connect best with that information. And so having flexibility in those kinds of assignments can be really important. And if you really want children to learn information, helping them use their strongest skills to do that can be helpful. So here's some thoughts, some suggestions, strategies for memorization. For those people who remember visual information better than verbal, make sure we're giving them images, charts, graphs, diagrams, anything, color coding even is a way to trigger an easier recognition of visual information. Verbal information, if you remember that more easily, then what you're going to want to do is verbalize things. You're going to explain them to other people. You're going to put things into words. You're going to restate or summarize in your own words. And most people have one memory skill that's stronger than the other. Some people have just great memory skills for both. There are children, and that suggests some different types of strategies. Some children, some adults for that matter, are relatively weak, have a hard time, and really struggle to commit information to memory. So what I'm going to do now is, and there's a, I think I have this. Yes, I did. Okay, sorry for bopping around there a little bit. But I have a link here too. I uploaded the strategies that I'm going to share with you tonight on this area to where you can just download it from our website. So rather than trying to use your phone to take pictures, which you're welcome to do, of course, or badly write it all down, I'm going to give you a link that you can use to download these strategies. So if you have stronger visual memory, or your child has stronger visual memory, here's some things that you want to really focus on doing. While you're listening in class or doing your homework, if the teacher draws a picture or shows a picture, draw it in your notes, ask for a copy of it. That's going to help you remember that information, retrieve that information later. Create a picture in your mind, try to visualize it, draw that picture, even if one isn't provided. A lot of times taking notes and simply drawing a picture, if you've got good visual memory, is much better than trying to capture all those words and madly writing them down. Flashcards are also a great way to remember information and to learn information. If you've got stronger visual memory, put those pictures on those flashcards to make it easier. Don't skip over the pictures and the diagrams in your textbook. You really want to look at those to help remember key concepts. And color coding, I mentioned also, but if you color code your notes with the highlighter, then you can remember and relate that information by color much more easily. Stronger verbal memory, on the other hand, what we want to do is to restate what we hear in our own words. A great way to do this is to teach your parents. So if there are any students listening, teach your parents what you've learned. Talk to them about it, explain it to them, and you can, that will actually help you retrieve that information yourself much more easily. Mark up your notes, annotate, write yourself little notes in the margins or on another piece of paper and in your notes or whatever while you're remembering, so that you can really focus on the key details. Flashcards, but again, here you're going to be more word-based. And if you need to remember a picture, so for example, my verbal memory is stronger than my visual memory. So if I need to remember what something looked like, I put it into words. I create a picture, or I create a description of it. So there was a point at the top, and there were blue things on the side. And so I'm actually creating this word description. Mnemonics, or creating a story, can also help. So a mnemonics is just a way to remember something. So, um, a example that a lot of us know, or every good boy does fine, which is the lines on the clef in music, or homes for the names of the Great Lakes: Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior. So those are the kinds of things that that can be really helpful if we've got strong verbal memory. Say it aloud. Hearing it, not just reading it, really helps remember. Really helps cement that memory. If you are fortunate enough, or your child is fortunate enough to have really good visual and verbal memory, um, you can memorize extra information, and you are more efficient at it. And so the more you memorize, the easier it becomes when you're taking a test. You're going to have that information on hand. You can freeze up working memory to actually work on the reasoning and the problem solving part of it. You can dig into meaning in a deeper way if you have that information at your fingertips. So that's definitely something you want to consider if you are really good at remembering all kinds of stuff. Um, And then we want to spend a little time talking about weaker memory skills with multisensory content. So if we have weaker verbal and visual and skills, then we want to give our brains the best chance we can to actually encode, that is, store and connect that information to other things. So multiple modalities. And all that means really is seeing, hearing, touching, creating, uh, sometimes even smelling can be a helpful thing, but don't smell your science experiment unless you're sure it's safe. So here are some things that you can do: some visual things, some physical things, even something and kinesthetic movement. A very simple um, thing that most people aren't aware of, and I certainly wasn't at the time, otherwise I would have used it, is to take a ball and throw it back and forth with your child, to do math facts or to do spelling. And actually that physical movement of that back and forth helps encode memory more strongly. Some auditory technology. Here are a whole bunch of great strategies that you can use. These are helpful to everybody, but particularly helpful for those children who struggle a lot with remembering information. They need to experience it in a couple of different ways. Don't try to do all of this for everything. Pick and choose 2 or 3 things to do with really important information, especially. So what do we do now today? If we think about, okay, we know we have children who have some cognitive strengths and some weaknesses. What do we do about those weaker skills? And some of you may have some experiences with this, or may have a child with an individualized education plan or a 504 or something like that, so that the school is providing extra supports beyond what typically is happening in the classroom. And so, and this is what we call the old way. The old way is accommodations. So these are things like more time on the test, or getting verbal and reading the instructions, as well as having written instructions, or preferential seating, those kinds of things. Modifications to the curriculum, those would be things like reading a text at a lower grade level, lower reading level, or maybe fewer math problems, just some adjustment to the actual work. But then, of course, compensatory strategies, which are the kinds of things I've just been talking about. That is, if we have a weaker verbal memory, want to use our stronger visual memory and those sorts of things. But there are a lot of different ones depending on what we think those weaker areas are. And this is all great, and we need to be able to do these things to support our learners. But there's another piece that is absolutely essential and that we know now can add tremendously to the effectiveness of supporting our learners. So in addition to these three things, we also know that we can help our children build stronger cognitive skills. Whatever they came into the world with is not where they're stuck. It's true for us as well as adults, although we probably haven't been used to thinking about that. When we can actually help them build these stronger cognitive skills, they will be able to rely less and less on these other strategies, these other approaches, because their skills are simply there for them. They can pay attention better. They can hold more information in working memory. Their visual, their verbal memory is stronger. So we can actually do that, and we can actually train these skills. And so, and we talk about that a lot in the book as well. But in fact, cognitive skills can be developed to a far greater degree than most people recognize. We probably, most of us have been used to thinking that we're pretty much as smart or as dumb as we're ever going to be, that intelligence is something that is predetermined, and that's what we're stuck with. But that's not the truth. So when we talk about the truth for parents, as the subtitle of this book, that's really what we have in mind, and how important it is as parents that we understand that intelligence isn't fixed, that it can be improved. And then we improve these skills, we actually enhance our children's ability to learn to read and to do math and to do everything else. And by the way, better behavior also generally comes with it. If you think about a child maybe who's struggling with the academics, they start to lose their self-confidence. It starts to erode. They may become easily frustrated. And children who aren't getting it, who can't follow what's going on, who can't take notes or aren't understanding or are lagging behind and not getting some of the concepts they're being asked to understand, very often take a couple of different approaches, one of which is to act out. So becoming the class clown or being disruptive can be a symptom of underlying cognitive challenges. And so can the other side of it, just shutting down. I just won't do it. I can't do it. I'm no good. And what we know now is that we can actually improve these underlying cognitive skills. And that's the greatest news that I think we can ever happen. Just to give you a little bit of a sense for how much these can be improved. What we did was I took an average of cognitive assessment data on about 60 kids that we had worked with, and looked for those skills. So remember, some of them had really strong areas too. So you're looking here across the bottom: attention, working memory, flexible thinking, visual and verbal memory, some of our reasoning skills, which we haven't talked about as much tonight, and then processing speed sort of on the right-hand side. And so for students who are really struggling in these areas, this is an average of the ones who are really struggling. And what we're looking at here is a percentile ranking. So for example, for attention, the 7th percentile means that this group of children on average scored below 93% of all of the students who took this test. So really weak areas. Unless we're up between these red lines, we're really, really, really going to struggle. Cognitive training is what results in the lighter blue line. So you can see these scores being right up for the most part in the middle of the expected range. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of how much change can happen and how strong these skills can be, and you can probably imagine what a difference that makes. So takeaways, I hope that you're leaving with some of these thoughts tonight, and then we'll open up for questions. But understanding that cognitive skills are the foundation for learning, they are how we learn, and therefore they're absolutely important for us to understand. Understanding that everybody has cognitive strengths and weaknesses, that these contribute to and have a huge impact on reading and math, and of course, everything else that we do. That we can, when we understand a child's cognitive strengths and weaknesses, we can help them use their cognitive strengths. When I'm talking to kids about their strengths, they have a learning superpower. And most of them never thought before that they had a learning superpower, but they do. And when they understand what that is and how to take advantage of it, it is very empowering. In addition to that, we can help students build these weaker cognitive skills. So they're simply there for them to use in their learning, and it makes learning easier, more fun. And when learning is easier and more fun, students are more capable and confident. And that's how we get more capable and confident learners. So, love to answer any questions. I hope we've got a ton of them.
Do you have any other advice if someone was audio visual learner?
That they are probably learn really well from watching videos and things like that. That's what I'm guessing. You're hearing and you're seeing, and they're combining them at the same time. So, think about how you create opportunities for them to experience whatever it is they need to learn. And watching a video is an obvious one that may be something also where they can, if that's an opportunity, they can also replay parts of it. If they weren't getting it, they can slow it down, they can move it around. But now think about other ways that you could do that. So you can do that, give them that same opportunity where they're creating and using their own auditory and visual skills to represent that. So acting something out, creating their own movie about something, explaining something to a family member, teaching something to a family member, so that you're getting and drawing a picture as they're doing it. I know very often kids will say, well, my family is too busy. They don't have time. We've sometimes recommended that they teach their dogs how to spell. And then when they explain, it doesn't have to, it could be even a stuffed animal, could be whatever, but simply the act of stating it and explaining it, when we can teach something, that's when we know that we really have learned it ourselves. But simply the act of putting it into words, trying to summarize, and trying to actively retrieve it is really helpful.
Okay. So are there any connections with mental health issues and cognitive learning?
There are a lot of connections with mental health issues. So there's research that they've done where they went through all of the mental health identifications, the codes in the manual that talks about mental health conditions. And what they were able to document is all of those mental health conditions, depression, bipolar disorder, you go right down the list, all have cognitive consequences. So they all impact cognition and our ability to think and to learn. And then it doesn't have to be a formal mental health condition. It can simply be stress and anxiety. And what happens when we're stressed or when we're feeling anxious, is that our brains, we go into fight or flight mode. Most of us have, when we've all had that experience when something scares us, and frankly, learning experiences can be stressful for many kids. Um, what happens is our brains are ready to fight or to flee, but what that means is that we then diminish our ability to actually think, and we to use the part of our brain that is the reasoning and decision making and planning part of our brain. Um, and so it has a huge impact on learning, and especially over time, it can impact cognitive development. So when we are able to help, it's sort of a two-way street on that. The cognitive skills don't cause things like depression and major mental health issues, but they can be very much related to anxiety. And when we can help improve cognitive capacity, that can have a big impact on reducing anxiety and stress for kids.
Another question we have is, considering that the long-term goal would be for kids to live productive lives in their communities, can these strategies be implemented at work by their bosses?
By their bosses and by them. Absolutely. So when you have a good sense for, um, we have done actually work in some workforce environments. We did some work with in an oil refinery, actually, with people who were studying to be console operators and helping them develop their cognitive skills. I think if you look at what employers are looking for today in the workplace, um, even if you think about, I remember seeing some research on Google and tech companies, and you'd think that their top list would be, well, you have to know how to program and you have to know how to this technical thing and blah blah blah. It turns out that the biggest predictors of success at Google and all of these other companies are what they refer to as soft skills. Soft skills meaning really these cognitive skills, especially executive functions. And so when you hear someone say soft skills, think executive functions, because it's basically the same thing. If I think about, I have grandchildren now, and I think about what their lives are going to be like, and when they get into the workforce, a lot of the jobs that exist today, nobody had ever heard of or thought of when we were in school and growing up. So we can't teach our kids everything they need to know to have these jobs. Probably the most important thing we can do for them is help them develop these learning skills, because they're going to have to learn whatever jobs they're going to have, and they're going to have to relearn them, and they're going to have to learn something new again when the world changes as fast as it does. So when we so that's part of the answer, and the other part of the answer is, yes, we can absolutely use these skills, and helping and supporting our colleagues and our employees to use their strongest skills really can help us take advantage of one aspect of diversity, of having people who have different strengths, and really using them and not expecting everybody to be exactly the same.
One more question from a viewer that has a 2-year-old daughter. They would like to know, do you have advice for building cognitive skills in toddlers?
I do. And we've been talking a lot about older kids. A lot of the families that we work with are, kids who are like 6 and up, because it's not very easy. We don't, you have to be very specialized to do an assessment of a toddler, a cognitive assessment. But there are a lot of things that you can do to help develop these skills in young children. And there's actually a page on our website. So if you go to mybrainware.com and type in the search bar of something like young child or young children, you'll actually, there's a list of a bunch of activities. And And I'm a big believer that learning should be really fun. And I'm a big believer that games and activities that don't seem like work or school are are the best ways to learn things. So um, there's one that comes to mind now, which is doing or you can do this when you're driving too. Sometimes you buy those little cards with all the license plate, tree, squirrel, whatever, and you do the bingo, as you see these things as you're driving around. That's actually a great activity. But it's even better if you have the kids, it's probably not when they're 2, but when they're maybe a little bit older, think of the things to go do this. But go sit outside and close your eyes and listen and hear the sounds and see if you can identify them. Just simple activities like that. And the other thing is one of the most important activities for children to develop executive functions is actually role play. So dress up and play. And we don't do enough of that. It's not as big a part of kindergarten as it used to be. Kindergartner has become, unfortunately, in my view, too academic. So do that play at home. And if you think about it, here's why it helps and here's why it works. When I'm pretending to be a police officer, or I'm pretending to be a doctor, or I'm pretending to be whatever it is, I have to keep that role in my head. And I can't say things that aren't out of character. So as I'm doing that, that's actually using inhibitory control. It's using your working memory. It's using your cognitive flexibility. So it's actually helping build these things. And the better we get at doing it. So, and there's actually a lot of research that role play and just play in general actually helps develop these skills.
And would you say these skills are helpful for adults as well? So like role playing or games or being interactive in that way?
Yeah, it becomes a little harder to develop them and to do it efficiently. Um, that's really how we develop them when we're little. When you get to be older, the kinds of changes that we looked at here, these kinds of changes in executive functions can be accomplished with cognitive training much more efficiently than you could do by role playing. But role playing has a lot of benefits as well. So cognitive flexibility is one actually that can be a really important part of when you put yourself in somebody else's shoes and have to think about it from their perspective. And this is a synapse. These are the connections among the neurons in our brains. So if you're wondering what that is, and this is where how our brains connect, they actually build these connections in our brains. So that's why I say it would stay connected. And here's my email address and my phone. So if anybody has further questions or would like to learn something more, it's my favorite topic. So would love to be able to connect with people.
Hey, well, thank you so much, Betsy. We're just about out of time, but we do want to thank you for sharing this information with us and taking time out of your busy schedule. And I hope everyone goes away with some good information, and we'll hopefully see you at the library one day.